Hello, and welcome to our podcast, Theo's Coffee Break, where we talk about what's going on in our world while getting to know each other on a more personal level. I'm your host, Theo, and for today's episode on Theo's Coffee Break, I'm joined by Chris Cutting, a talented composer whose fingerprints are on some of the biggest records out there right now. Hey, Chris.
Hey.
So glad to have you here.
Yeah, same.
So sunglasses today, huh?
Yeah, it's just a little early for me in the day.
A little early, or is your future that bright?
We'll go with both, somewhere in the middle.
Oh, awesome. So Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself, and feel free to introduce yourself. Yeah.
I'm from Muskegon, Michigan. Lived in Florida for about 5.5 years, back in the early 2000s, then moved back, and then I've been pretty much in Grand Rapids for the most part of that since. Worked heavily in the service industry, but I've always had a passion for music. About 15 years ago, I really decided to start taking it seriously, not just with writing, but investing in the right equipment and the right gear needed to build a home studio to be able to have more creative freedom to write from home. And and so now I write music full time, and I don't do the service industry anymore, and it's going pretty good so far.
Yeah, so 15 years ago is when you decided to start taking it more seriously. But when would you say music first found its way into your life?
A couple sides to that. Back when I was a very small child, my parents were both professional musicians. They had my brothers and I all start taking piano lessons in kindergarten. And at first I loved it. Then I had a new piano teacher. I notoriously would not practice, and then I would get scolded every time I went to my piano lesson for not practicing, which reinforced me not wanting to practice. And it was just this cycle. And at the same time, I found I was passionate about art, and I was begging my parents in third grade to let me take art classes instead of piano lessons. And finally, in fourth grade, they worked it out, and I loved it. And that art teacher I had reintroduced me into music in a way, even though it was all around me all the time. But they would play different albums while we were working, and I realized pretty early on that we had very similar tastes. And one time they came back from a vacation in Las Vegas, and they said, we saw this amazing show called Mystère by this weird company called Cirque du Soleil, and this is in the 90s when nobody knew who Cirque du Soleil was, and they brought the soundtrack back, and that soundtrack was hauntingly beautiful. It just hit me in the depths of my soul, and the rest is history. I just became very passionate about their music from the 90s and dissected those albums and really taught myself to write music back then when I was in high school. And so then I made an album in high school that was actually surprisingly really successful, where right across the street there used to be a recording studio called Station C Studios. Now it's a Topper's Pizza. Super nice recording studio. And so recorded an album there, brought in musicians, and sold that album, sold a ton of them, broke even with studio costs and hiring those musicians. And so then I decided I wanted to write music.
Would you say, how old were you? You said this is your moment when you were in high school, or?
Yeah, so I took art classes from fourth grade until after I graduated. And,
okay.
And I'd say during middle school is when I was introduced to that music. And then when I got into high school, I got more into music, and I decided I wanted to write it. And I realized I had a knack for it pretty early on.
And you recorded your first album in high school.
Yeah, so I
Wow.
started heading into my senior year, I think over the summer, and it was done by midwinter. And I remember releasing it at a concert. Our high school choir did a midwinter concert. It might have been early spring, anyways, like March, somewhere in there. And I sang one of the songs from the album with my friend Heather, who also sang on that. The song was actually called Duet, and it had this amazing reaction. And then the CDs that came in the mail the day before, we sold so many after that concert that we paid more than half the album off.
Wow.
And that started a tradition too, where that the choir at Mona Shores High School does like a senior song, and I think it's an original song every year. And I didn't realize till several years later that I started a tradition by doing that.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, so it sounds like that defining moment for yourself to when you knew you wanted to be a composer also sent a ripple effect and made some pretty cool changes and impacts to how your high school does stuff now.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned that one of your biggest influences was hearing an album from your art teacher. Was there any other big influences early on that really played a part in you wanting to pursue being a composer?
For me, some music, not all, but some music just hit me emotionally deeper than words. And it felt like magic. It was beyond what's of this world. And so I've always been drawn to that, and I felt a connection that I could see maybe some other people didn't have or they hadn't developed. And so I just was constantly drawn to it. And, by following that and chasing that over all those years, I just kept getting closer and closer, and then I was in the thick of it.
That's amazing. Sorry. The sunglasses. For you who's listening, I didn't realize I was going to be interviewing a diva today, but for many good reasons. This is amazing. Hearing more about your story and what influences you for anyone else out there who wants to pursue music as a career. So thank you so much for sharing that. Could you walk us through your songwriting process when you're collaborating with major artists, or just your songwriting process in general? Like, how do you get the juices running?
Yeah. So right now I'm working full-time writing music, and it's for a producer who goes by the producer tag DA Got That Dope. And it's hard to answer that question because he is the coolest dude. And basically, I have to give him a quota of a certain number of songs every day. And he gives me some back and forth guidance, but for the most part, I'm just doing my own thing. And he lets me do my own thing. And he tries to dial it in and push me in certain directions when he wants to change something up. But, with him, it's pretty easy going. When I've done other collaborative things, I think for a lot of people who decide they want to write music, because you feel so connected to what you do, it's very challenging sometimes to work with other people because other people might hear something differently, or you might have to scrap something that you're passionate about, or find compromises where you think that it would sound better this way, but I'm not going to be able to do that. So I think keeping pride in check and being humble, and also practicing critical thinking skills, that's very important. But yeah, in regards to the context of the work I'm currently doing, it's pretty laid back with the collaborative process. The way we do things is I'll come up with instrumentals, and I'll come up with a chorus and then a verse, so that it basically covers the whole song. I'll do 4 bars of one and 4 bars of the other. And I'll also, so all the instruments, the bass line, everything but drums and the vocals that somebody would write as an artist to go over that track. But I'll still have like vocals as in like a choir, background vocals in those tracks. And I'll do 3 to 5 of those a day and send them to DA. And what he does is he's actually very respectful of what I write. He doesn't typically do much to change that up, but he'll take what I have and build that into a fully produced backing track for an artist to come and lay down rap or whatever they're going to do. And then he'll send me the finished version, and then he'll shop it around to different A&R reps or different artists. And every once in a while, one of them gets picked up.
That's really awesome. Now, you mentioned something that I think many other creatives or many other people may come into these kind of obstacles where there's a creative direction that is asked to be changed. And you mentioned having to put your pride aside. Is there a particular impactful experience to where it really was hard for you to loosen the reins that you could share with me and who's listening?
I think earlier on, when I was writing, I encountered that more often, where I really had some inner turmoil. One of my earlier clients is, it's called 8 Miles From Home, and they have a YouTube channel. They're British expats that were living in Thailand, and then they moved to Portugal. Now they're in the Philippines, and they reached out to me wanting some original music for a new series they were releasing about their growing family. And, so for a YouTube video, they wanted a full kind of over-the-top soundtrack backing, really emotionally driven. And I remember getting some feedback from them saying, we aren't really into this section. It's a little too Disney movie soundtracky. And when I made that music, I thought that was the coolest part, but scrapped that section, built something new. It worked great. And then listening to it a couple months later, I was like, wow, they absolutely made the right call. And more often than not, that's how it goes. But I've come to realize it doesn't matter. I'm here to do a job. Yeah. There are other people who are just as talented, if not considerably more talented. And I'd rather be the one being able to bring something creative that people can experience into fruition, and having that opportunity, versus them taking it in a different direction with someone else. And as a result of looking at these things in hindsight, it's helped me grow, and it's helped me become more mature with my approach, but also helps me see a bigger picture than where I was at the time and what I was able to see, and put things into perspective even more.
Yeah, I would say that's a great example of what collaboration is that seeing the bigger picture, focusing on how you're going to work together and bring the project to its fullest potential. And when you're collaborating, as you said, is that you have another perspective that's not just yours, and it needs to be a shared perspective and not just solely focused on one individual perspective.
Right. I've gotten to the point now where I really want to, at some point in the future, work more and more as a composer for something where there are more opinions involved. I'd love to score something to film where I have to take on a challenge of getting into the director's head and really trying to think outside the box and push those boundaries in a collaborative way.
I love that. Yeah, and then also, to who's listening, maybe they'll want to work with you too. Or they might know someone. So this is Chris Cutting, and you can go to his website, chriscuttingmusic.com.
chriscutting.com.
chriscutting.com. Yeah, we're not done yet, but I just want to throw that out there because that's a great little segue to kind of pitch yourself out there. So What I'd like to know next is what role do virtual instruments play in your soundscape?
Yeah, so when I started, it was, I think, the year 1999 or 2000. I was using Korg synthesizers, and there's a lot of built-in sounds. And so I'd sequence something in the synthesizer. You were maxed out at 16 tracks for those or instruments that you could use. So I would do that, and then I would decide what I wanted live, and I'd pull those out of the mix, and then I'd export all the other tracks separately at the studio as high quality WAV files. And that was my first experience of live musicians. But virtual instruments in that regard have always been there. What's changed is over the last 20 years, the industry has grown in a way paired with the technology advancements to really change the industry of music. And so, for example, now, if you go see a movie, it could have a $200 million budget for this movie. Obviously, the soundtrack, the score is going to have a huge chunk of money coming towards it. You're going to hear full orchestra, you're going to hear this and that, but you're also going to hear virtual instruments. And so what virtual instruments are is basically musicians will come into a studio, the virtual instrument company will record countless takes of different notes and transitions, oftentimes in the thousands of WAV files, and they'll use coding to piece that together so that it's playable on a MIDI keyboard. And some of them are just insanely authentic sounding, and some of them aren't. But I started getting into virtual instruments maybe about 15 years ago. And back then there was a company called Tonehammer, and they were one of the pioneers, you could say, in the virtual instrument industry that we see today. And it's also kind of the beginning of SoundCloud. And back then it was a completely different thing. It was basically just this community of musicians and composers. You'd post something, you'd be able to network. There was always feedback from other people in the industry, and those connections really got me motivated. And I started picking up a few virtual instruments. Around that time, Tonehammer split into two companies. The two founding people, Charles Fullman and Mike Peasley, I think had different visions. So they split their virtual instrument catalog down the middle. 8Dio was formed by Charles Fullman, and Sound Iron was formed by Mike Peasley, and they each took half the instruments. And so around that time, I think Sound Iron was trying to, establish its new brand and build that up. And they did a contest for a composition contest for one of their virtual instrument libraries. I think it was called Rust, where they sampled all these metallic rusty objects and then built an instrument out of them.
Oh my gosh.
And so I was so excited. I wrote some music to showcase that, and I submitted it, and I won. And I was so flattered. And when I found out I won, I immediately, in my response, I also said, hey, if you have other instruments you'd like demos for, I'd love the opportunity. And within a half hour, Mike sent me an email back saying, oh, that'd be great. Here's one right now. It's due in a week. And I said, okay. And so ever since then, I've been writing demos for Sound Iron. And because of that, I have this huge library of all these Sound Iron virtual instruments. And those have been absolutely key to a lot of the work I've done. I'm very grateful that that chain of events happened, because for all of my commissions that I've had, all the projects that I've worked on, virtual instruments come into play. Ideally, live instruments are the best, but I'm not a musician that can play all these different instruments. I can play the piano, and I can sing, and I can play some wind instruments. So
would you care to sing for us right now?
I love being in the background and not on stage, so I would pass. But
I do have a question though. Yeah. You were saying back then and around that time, can you give us an idea of what time frame you're exactly talking about? Like, is this like a last year or like 5 years?
So this all happened maybe around 2010.
Okay, so about 10, 15 years. 15 years.
I remember that whole thing happened with Sound Iron. Probably, I'd have to look up what time that company was formed out of Tone Hammer, but probably around 2010.
Okay, so like mid 2000.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, just to kind of give, me and who's listening right now an idea of like how far back are we going? Because, when I think back then, I think like 90s. And so, yeah, well, that's amazing. So it does sound like that virtual instruments play a huge integral part in your soundscape, most definitely, and definitely in your work. How would you say that you balance technical skill with emotional storytelling in your music now?
I would say technical skill is something that you always need to stay fresh on, current on, and up to date on. It's very important to learn those skills so that barriers are taken down when you want to be creative. And so for me, I have my own system that I use. There's a lot I don't know, a lot I don't understand about engineering in regards to studio work. But for what I do, I know what I need to know, and I'm always trying to learn a little bit more. Because as long as I have all of that down, those barriers are gone for when I just want to sit there and turn my brain off and be creative, if that makes sense.
That does make sense because, I have a background in music as well. My next question would be for you, what does diversity in music mean to you on both a creative and industry level?
I see diversity as in like diversity in the LGBT community, for example. So me being a gay man, in some ways the music industry is very welcoming. In other aspects, maybe it doesn't feel so much. For me, I see myself. So I'm doing work in a genre that I'm not terribly passionate about sometimes. I've not really listened to much rap in my life. I'm much more a world fusion guy. And so for DA, that's an advantage for him. And I think that's one reason he reached out all those years ago, because it's something outside the box.
Does he particularly work in, for anyone who doesn't know DA, got that dope.
Yeah.
What is his main genre?
So rap. He's produced all sorts of albums for Tyga, for Kodak Black, or songs. I
think Nicki Minaj,
Eminem, Lil Wayne. He just did one of the tracks on Beyonce's big album, her country album. He did produce one of the tracks that also had Dolly Parton on it. So that's kind of his thing. He's done hundreds of these songs that he's produced. For me, I never really listened to that genre. So I don't know if it's welcoming to the LGBT community, and it's something that I've kind of, I'm ashamed to say, been a little reserved about, pronouncing from the rooftop who I am in that regard. Not that it's relevant in any way to my work. And I haven't shied away from that either, but I'm kind of unfamiliar with that scene. And my biggest fear is that for me, being proud of who I am, that it could jeopardize a relationship if an artist who is, not that they would be, but let's say there was a bigoted artist or something, and then they were like, I can't believe I have a gay co-writer on this song or whatever. And I don't think that would happen, but it's just some paranoia that I have. And that's kind of disgusting and shameful on my part. And so I fight that, and I sincerely think that that's a me issue. But I think that's also kept me from really celebrating some of the music I write, because I love being in the background. I love being kind of anonymous. And I think it's reinforced by some of that stuff. It's just easier to just write music and send it rather than bring the potential for some crazy thing that probably would never happen like that to actually happen.
Yeah, and I would want to say that the industry has evolved quite a bit in terms of equality. Now, there's definitely room for improvement when it comes to equity, but when it comes to equality and being more open to the LGBTQ plus community, it's definitely come a long way. So my big question would be is like, have you faced or witnessed moments where diversity was either uplifted or overlooked during your career?
And that's the thing. No, I haven't. And it's really comforting. Soundiron, several years ago, they thought, we have all these awesome demos that have been made by these talented composers to showcase our instruments. And so why don't we put them together in a catalog and give these artists the opportunity to have them be included for licensing agreements. So they'll serve a bigger purpose than just showcasing this virtual instrument. People can license these tracks to be used for, background for TV or film or for whatever. And when they did that, they showed us the contract that people would have to agree to use our music. And one of the things of note on there was they would not work with anybody who is, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, a hate group. And wow. Okay. And that was a very proactive, cool thing to see in that contract. So to me, I see that the industry is filled with celebration of diversity and a love of diversity. But for whatever reason, so I think here's where my problem is. I've always dealt with perceived perceptions of me, if that makes sense. When I was a kid in elementary school up until through middle school, went through a lot of depression and lost a bunch of friends because of that. And my favorite movie of all time, Meet the Robinsons, there's a scene where Goob, the bad guy, but he's really a good guy, is talking about when he was in school, and he's like, they all hated me, and he's talking about his classmates, and as he's saying that, his classmates are walking by, and they're like, hey Goob, nice, that's a cool backpack or a notebook, and they're being genuine, and he's like, they hated me. and that's kind of me too, and I've never been able to fully shake that, and I don't know why. Like I said, it's a me issue, and it's always kept in check for the most part. But I think that's playing in. That's always played into this type of stuff. I overthink things, and I think lately though, I've really started to just sit back and do my thing, and not really. That stuff's become a non-issue, and I don't think about it hardly at all anymore.
To which you shouldn't.
No, it's just create music and celebrate our creativity and who we are and our achievements and learn from our failures.
Well, and you reminded me of something, Tina Fey, the show 30 Rock. There was an episode of her, and she was really at war within herself about going to this high school reunion. And I don't remember if it was like coworkers or like, but they're all like, no, you need to go. Like, this is your time to shine. Like, you were at, the Rockefeller Center. Like, you're on top of the world. And she was afraid to go because people were so mean to her. Now, here's the funny thing, and I encourage anyone to watch this episode, and I'm not giving anything away. But she went, and they were all afraid of her because she was horrible to them. And she's like, what do you mean? Like, no, y'all were like bullies to me. Like, be nice to me. And they're like, no, you were the bully. You were mean to us. And it just goes to show that the perceived perception of who we are. It reminds me of a quote from Gossip Girl, and I quote this all the time, but it goes that reputation can be changed, but character stands forever. So even if someone sees you in a certain light, know that can change. But what cannot change is who you are and how you carry yourself with integrity and all those important things. So thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. And Meet the Robinsons is a great movie. I've never seen it until I met you.
It's a really good movie.
Yeah, so with that being said, thinking big picture, is there any kind of um, idea that you might have to where we can better support inclusion and representation in the music space? Or any way that we could possibly improve on what we're already doing?
I think it's very challenging in 2025 for a lot of people in general because diversity is being so aggressively targeted by this small minority who is the loudest person in the room. From a government standpoint, even, I think there's so much perceived attack on diversity. But because of that, it gives us an opportunity to stand strong and come together and be even louder about who we are and how it's okay. It's to be celebrated. And I've seen that. For me, more than any time in my life, I'm living in isolation because I just work in my basement and I don't have a job that I go to where I interact with people. And so it's a little different, but I can see it around me. I think that there's a growing connection of resistance, and so much of that is people of diversity by people who know people who are different. Parents whose son might be gay or might have a trans daughter or whatever. I see a lot of people standing up, and I don't know. I think coming together is always the right thing to do, but I don't know if there is anything beyond that we're capable of in this moment on a large scale. I'd love to think so, but I don't know. I think we're all just trying to keep our heads above water in some ways.
Yeah, no, that's definitely great to point out. I do think like conversations like this are very important.
Yeah.
Change starts at home. And if you want to go a little bit further than that, it starts with how you choose to live your life and the choices that you make. And through that, that's how we can make change in humanity, is living by example. So moving on, this is amazing. I'm loving the deepness, the diversity. I want to come back to you working with David and talk a little bit more about what it's like working with DA Got That Dope, and how do you approach a collaboration at that kind of level?
So one thing about a while back, I asked him, I was like, hey, do you have specific things like artists that you're shooting for, or this or that? And he says, nope, I just write music and shop it around. And so because of that, there's not too much pressure to head in a specific direction. It's more about, with him wanting me to just think outside the box and go crazy. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm doing 3 to 5 tracks a day, his thoughts are, hopefully one of those will be awesome and the rest will be horrible. That's fine because we're exploring, we're trying something new. What he wants is something fresh and original and catchy. And so that's what I try to do. So collaboration wise, it's, like I said earlier, one of the most easygoing processes. I'll write something, send it to him. Sometimes he'll say, I like the first half of this, but not the second, and I'll redo that. Every once in a while, he'll say, can you add this or this or this back into there? And I'm like, yeah, I can do that. But in general, it's just me being creative and locking myself in my studio for 10 hours a night and seeing what I can come up with and sending it to him. And then from that point on, it's typically in his hands. That's oftentimes what happens with this, because I'll send it to him. He tries to not bring in other musicians on the instrumental side of the track. He tries to really keep it between he and I, but sometimes he'll bring in another musician to add a specific part in. But once that gets sent off to an artist that actually decides they want to use that, they're going to have their own producer as well. Sometimes they might bring in other instruments and add that in. and so it's very possible that some of these tracks, especially on some of the bigger albums or maybe a bigger artist, just because that's the nature of the industry and their team, there might be a lot more hands in the pot. And for me, it's weird to listen to the final song and be like, all those instruments and stuff, I wrote that, I came up with this, that's the foundation for everything that was made from there on out, I could think. And yet there's like 7 people involved in this. I'm like, oh, okay, it's all right, it's whatever. But I think that's really cool. I think it's what an honor to be able to come up with the initial idea for something and then see more hands on the pot and then see it get released. And nobody will ever know that I had anything to do with that unless they do some digging. And I love that, actually.
Could you actually share a couple of songs that people could listen to that you've worked on?
Yeah. So, oh, wow. Going way back when I first started collaborating with DA, we had a track called Sleeping on the Floor by Lil Bibby and G Herbo. And that one was pretty cool. But since I've started working for him full time, writing, we've done a Gucci Mane track called Idiot's Worst Nightmare, which was Gucci Mane and BG. Most recently, Rich the Kid released an album, and one of the singles on the album, there's also a music video for it. It's called Bandman. And that was a track that I remember sending DA the parts, and he's like, "Oh, this is really cool." And I think he had me add something in really last minute, maybe piano or something. Yeah, so those are some of the recent ones.
Are there any upcoming projects that you're excited about, you and David, or maybe just you?
Just in general, just keep working with him. He is really excited about 2025, it seems like, and so I'm excited for all the potential placements we're going to have over this next year.
Yeah, I'm very excited to hear more about this. I might have to invite you back on later on down the road. This is very exciting, and very cool. So what's something most people don't understand about the music creation process at your level of work in this industry?
I think people, from a perspective of people who want to write music or they want to get into this, I think a lot of people think that you have to follow rules. If you go to school for it, you're taught rules to the extreme. And the biggest thing is throw all that out the window to an extent. Obviously, rules can be providing a nice fundamental backbone in a lot of situations, but a good example, I was listening to NPR a few years ago, and there was somebody who, they might have been nominated for a Grammy or something, but they released this album, and this album really gave them a lot of attention and a lot of a big boost to their career and kind of took them to this point. And one of the songs they wrote specifically to go against what a composition teacher taught them at college.
Wow.
And that composition teacher said, never have a descending bass line. And so they wrote the whole song to showcase a descending bass line, and that was one of the bigger tracks.
Wow.
The point is, you should use those rules as a point of,
guidelines?
Yeah, guidelines, education, but understand that they have their own time and use. But if you're creating music, you're doing your own thing. You're pushing boundaries. You don't want something that's already out there. I think about composers. Oftentimes, well-known composers have their own style, like John Williams. Alan Silvestri's one of my favorite composers. But they tend to have their own style. And Danny Elfman, for example, he has his Danny Elfman. Yeah. You know it's Danny Elfman if you hear it. And that's, I think, in part due because he just does what he wants. He doesn't have a formal music education. He'll be the first to say that you don't need one in all situations. And so I think not following the rules is a good thing. And beyond that, I'm not really sure.
That's okay. I was actually just thinking of another person, Alan Menken.
Oh, yeah.
Gosh, incredible. So
iconic.
He's so iconic. He's amazing. Would you say that would be the advice you'd want to give to young creatives from underrepresented backgrounds trying to make it in the music industry?
I would say a couple things. Don't let your ego get in the way of your self-criticism and your ability to grow. No matter where you're at in the industry, whether you're at the very bottom or even if you're at the top, you are not perfect. You are not a god, and you always have room to improve.
I would agree on that.
The other side of it is you really got to get the business side down. Oftentimes with creative work, for you to be successful, you have to get good at other things. And with music, it's how do you respond if someone reaches out to you and says, hey, I want you to write this for me? Okay, well, how much do I charge? What about the rights to it? How does copyright work? How do I negotiate? I don't want to lose this opportunity, but I also don't want to sell myself short. And that's, I think, one of the scariest things, because you can be focused on creating for years with this goal in mind. And then when something actually happens, you could, miss out on a big opportunity.
So how did you learn the business side? Like where did you go? What were your resources?
So I remember one of the first commissions I got was to do some writing for some kind of Bollywood movies in Telugu in India. And there's a composer, M. Gibran, who's based out of India and Singapore, and he's done all these movies and commercials and stuff. And he reached out to me and said, hey, I was wondering if you could help me with some composition. And I said, yeah. And I remember reaching out to a friend who's also a composer saying, hey, what do I do? So knowing people who have that experience, who you trust, who you can go to ask questions. There's also obviously a lot of resources out there with books and the internet now too, but really talk to somebody if you can who's gone through the experiences of it. That's huge. You got to network, you got to know people.
I would also say having a lawyer on hand, that would be a huge thing, especially when contracts and negotiations are getting involved. I would say to that too, books, use your resources. We're surrounded by AI as well. I fully stand on what you just said. Is understanding the business side is going to be very important, especially if you want to grow and make money.
Right.
So thank you so much for sharing that. That's some really amazing advice. How do you stay inspired when the industry gets overwhelming, especially since AI is becoming even more of an integral and important part in the creative process? Yeah.
I mean, and on one hand, you can say, well, this is even more motivation to push my boundaries and think more outside of the box. On the other hand, I think people at the top of the industry are well aware that if you want an advantage, you have to be able to find a balance between AI and your own creativity and the creativity around you. I've been encouraged to use AI for some vocal stuff here and there, and I'm so conflicted because I know what that's doing. I know that that is taking away work from someone else, but at the same time, that's where things are headed. I think that there's a lot to be worked out on the legal side. There's all these unanswered questions. Our system has not caught up even with basic copyright stuff. It's so far behind, and it's not going to get fixed anytime soon. So I don't know. That's tough. In a lot of ways, I wish that AI wasn't a thing. But then there's other aspects of life where, you can be glad it's there. So everyone needs to make their own determination on that. But I think that we need to have some grace in our judgments so that whatever we think on that, we have to be kind of open and respectful of what other people think too, because we don't have a yes or no answer on that, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And as someone who does rely on AI now, especially now that they dress me every day, I put it in there. I literally put in my chat GBT. I'm like, what should I wear today? What's the weather like in Grand Rapids, Michigan? And they put together an outfit.
Well, the other side of that too is if you are an up and coming artist or an aspiring artist or musician, I mean, I feel like we are all of the opinion that people should be paid more for their creative work.
Yes, absolutely.
And so most likely you can't afford a graphic artist for your album artwork, or, you know, something like this. And so it makes sense for you to use those resources as they become available in regards to AI. But at the same time, if you can avoid it, you should. And I think if there's always an opportunity to celebrate a live musician and their talent, that's the path we should take. But then it also goes back to virtual instruments. That's not AI. There are a small handful of virtual instruments that claim to incorporate AI. But in general, you know, virtual instruments, is that taking away work from actual musicians? In some cases, yes, but virtual instrument companies also pay those musicians who they record the audio of. And, you know, some virtual instrument companies also pay royalties. Whenever they sell that, those musicians get a cut. And so that's a responsible transition of incorporating technology. I don't see that happening with AI. And I think that's what the bigger issue is that these tech bros have an idea and they want to get rich and they don't care who they screw. They see an opportunity, one of the dark sides of capitalism, and it could be to our detriment and downfall in a lot of ways. And
well, and I just want to say too is that you and I, we grew up in a time when virtual instruments were introduced into music more heavily. It caused a ruckus. For a long time, people did not recognize Kesha as an actual artist because her and Dr. Luke utilized so many virtual instruments, and people are like, this is not really music. And then EDM and club music became more of a thing, and that even more virtual. And we're kind of outgrowing that judgment, and from virtual instruments, now the new enemy is AI.
Right.
And artists like Chappelle Rowan, Ed Sheeran, and many others have spoken out about this and even released projects that were just silent. There was nothing in them to just kind of say, like, I'm not going to continue to help an industry grow in wealth if you're not going to respect what I'm bringing to the table as a creative. You know, my art and my creativity does deserve to get paid.
Well, I think too, if AI just steps in and does something, that's such a slap in the face for somebody who's spent 5, 10, 20 years trying to build up their craft. And then for an AI agent to be trained on your music and try to copy, learn from you and copy your style, it's such a disrespectful, douchey slap in the face. At the same time, like, I don't know if there's a solution.
Right.
The laws aren't going to be there to do anything.
Well, let's hope. Let's hope that, between you and me, we definitely will not be able to come up with a solution, but having the conversation is important to let people know that this is something very real and that it's something that does need to be part of one of the many focuses that are important in today's world. So moving on, if you could leave the audience with one truth about music, what would it be?
I would say that music is key to our souls, the depths of our souls, emotion. For me, music is something that is profoundly powerful, and it is somewhat universal. That's not to say that everybody is going to feel the same emotions from music. However, it is such a powerful way to connect with ourselves and just to be taken somewhere sometimes. I don't think we should ever undervalue what music is, the power of music, and the people that are involved with making that music. I can't imagine life without it.
I completely agree. Music it's just an important part about life. And there's moments when I hear songs and it just takes me back to a time of my life. And then I'm like, wow, I've come such a long way. So Chris, thank you so much for being here. This was such a powerful and honest conversation. Where again can listeners find your work and keep up with what you're doing?
chriscutting.com is my website. And I don't have any of my stuff with DA on there right now. With DA Got That Dope. But I plan to get that up there soon. But a lot of, there's just countless tracks, songs available to listen to on my website.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And for you who is listening, thank you so much for staying with us until the end. Again, thank you, Chris Cutting, for joining. And as he just said, feel free to check out his work and more about what he's got going on chriscutting.com. I do want to encourage anyone who is listening to please feel free to join the conversation and share your thoughts by sending an email to theoscoffeebreakpodcast@gmail.com. And if you really like being a part of our coffee break sessions, please subscribe and follow and turn those notifications on so you don't miss out on the next episode. Also, friend, again, don't forget to let me know what you think of our guest today by sending an email to theoscoffeebreakpodcast@gmail.com. I really can't wait to hear from you, and I just might share your thought during our next coffee break. Have a great day, and don't forget that you will always have a place at my coffee table.